Howdy folks, Spy Dingo here. I'm hoping you wouldn't mind joining me for a little bit of a chat. You see, I recently played through Fallout 3's Operation Anchorage DLC in preparation for a video on the Chinese Chimera tank from the same entry. I actually streamed it, other than I forgot to move it off of unlisted. Oh well. But while doing so, I collected quite a few thoughts about the whole ordeal. Let's start off by breaking down the lore of the operation. Then, I'd like to say my piece about each of the phases. So, in case you may not know, or maybe forgot, in the Fallout universe, Chinese forces under the command of one General Jin Wei invaded Alaska in 2066 in an effort to secure its strategic oil fields. This was accomplished rather easily, really, via an airborne assault during the dead of winter that caught the American forces completely off guard. Within a short period of time, old Uncle Sam was forced to retreat and ceded the town of Anchorage and her resources to the commies. This was obviously a huge boon for China and a massive blow to the United States. This leads us to Operation Anchorage, the American counterattack designed to reclaim, you guessed it, Anchorage. The operation consisted of 4 distinct phases, starting with the assault on the artillery base perched high above the city on the nearby mountainside. An elite unit of Special Forces soldiers were paradropped on the eastern slope in a manner eerily similar to the Chinese invasion a year earlier. These forces that survived the drop advanced towards the artillery base, both by scaling the cliffs and by fighting their way up the perilous eastern pass to the peak. Once there, this shockingly, I mean truly shockingly outnumbered force overcame dozens of squads of Chinese assault troops, including a detachment of China's elite Dragoon stealth units. Truly astronomical odds indeed. The strike team was able to reach and eliminate 3 guns that were raining hell upon the American positions surrounding Anchorage. This unprecedented triumph opened the door for the next 2 phases of the operation, the assault on the fuel depot to the west and the listening post to the east of the headquarters of the United States forces in the region. Each of these attacks would be carried out by a strike team led by the hero of the miraculous assault on the artillery base. The strike team would first capture the heavily fortified Chinese-occupied camp located on the ice fields, before then braving the perilous pass littered with the newly fielded Spider Bots, a predecessor to the Liberty Bots of Fallout 76, that are essentially walking landmines. After overcoming all of that, the strike team then waged a valiant head-on assault of the fuel depot, once again facing elite Dragoon units and the scourge of the snowfields, the Chimera tank, before detonating the fuel reserves, crippling Chimera deployments in the region. The next assault focused on taking control of the eastern listening post that was allowing the Chinese commanders to call in precision airstrikes from the squadrons of P-38 Lightning-like bombers circling high above. Along the way, the strike team would capture the nearby mining town before eliminating every single Dragoon unit that infested the listening post. Now, with Chinese heavy armor and air support rendered ineffectual, the American forces pressed their advantage and drove straight through the trench system of the front lines before being reinforced by freshly activated squadrons of winterized T-51B power armor units deployed by Vertibird along the front. Finally, after routing the enemy, the American forces detonated the pulse minefield protecting Anchorage and swarmed the Chinese HQ, eliminating the infamous General Jin Wei, beginning the rout of the Chinese forces in Anchorage. Okay, so that's how the operational details supposedly unfolded. I have many thoughts. Let's go chronologically here and rewind back to the assault on the artillery base. Why in the world would the insertion method for the operation have been a paradrop? You exist in a world where you have winterized vertibirds at the ready, and you use them for airdrops all the time throughout the rest of the DLC. Like, I get that mountainous terrain isn't conducive for landing, but certainly the Spec Op forces could have, I don't know, just rappelled down from the chopper to the slope. That certainly would have caused far fewer casualties. Now, you may say, but Spydingo, what about those anti-air defenses? Wouldn't those tear the vertibird squadron to pieces? I'd say sure, that would actually make sense, but for some strange Fallout reason, there aren't any. Seriously, I looked everywhere for anything that even remotely resembled anti-air, but there simply isn't any. And that brings up another point. Why even bother with the complex special forces operation to destroy the artillery? Just use whatever aircraft you use to, airdrop the Spec Ops people in, or I don't know, a vertebrate squadron to bomb those guns into oblivion. Seems like the obvious choice to me. Tactical issues aside though, I've got to give some props for the artillery base, specifically the loading mechanism and the gun themselves. The loader is a beautiful and hypnotizing thing to watch, spinning round and round, and the guns themselves look pretty dang good. Well, other than the fact that the rotation portion of the animation is quite wonky. Rather than the gun rotating within the firing platform, the entire rig, including the foundation concrete, rotates arbitrarily in the center. A truly jarring thing to see. Alright, now let's talk about the assault on the fuel depot. The spider mine bots are really, really neat. So I'm kinda shocked I completely forgot they existed. Although perhaps I shouldn't be all that surprised, considering the entire DLC takes less than 2 hours to complete, so you really don't spend a lot of time with any of the elements presented here. Also, there's the fact that the spider mine bots are not very useful. They generally are traveling in packs, which on the face of it seems good, but not when you destroy a single bot and then the entire pack goes up. So one of those concepts that really sounds cool, but in operation is effectively useless. Oh well. I was also impressed with the visual storytelling Bethesda managed to put on here in relation to the Chimera tanks at the depot. There are many tank chassis in various stages of being converted into Chimeras, in addition to one that is actually in drilling mode that is really helpful to explain the tank's design philosophy and what they were beforehand. What I really don't like so much though is again the whole tactical situation behind the assault. First of all, just bomb the fuel depot. Second of all, only 2 fuel tanks are destroyed. There are a ton more fuel tanks within the depot in eyeshot. So it's really hard to say that a crippling blow has been dealt to the Chinese armor. Third, why is there only a single Chimera guarding the yard? Based on the various conversations that can be heard between Yankee soldiers, the Chimera is the one unit that they truly fear. So given that, you would assume that significantly more resources would be in play here for protecting such an asset from the Chinese side. Fourth, and I won't go into too many details here since, my bread and butter is making videos on vehicles and I plan to do just that, but it really is odd to me that it's such a source of fear. I mean, sure, the laser turret is pretty powerful, at least against infantry, but it seems like it would be pretty hard pressed to take out any other form of armor. So I guess the reason why the Chimera outclasses US armor in the region is because the US simply doesn't have any armor deployed in the region. Finally, and perhaps my biggest technical issue with this phase, is the fact that the Chinese HQ is an oil refinery. Seems like to me there certainly should be some fuel there to be used by the Chimera units, regardless of what happens at the depot. This brings us to the listening post phase of the conquest. Although I don't really actually have any significant issues with the nuts and bolts of this particular phase, as the mining town and garrison, it's all fine. What I do have a problem with is the mandatory nature of the assault. I mean, the main supposed threat of the listening post is its ability to call in airstrikes from Chinese bombers circling the battlefield overhead. But does that make sense to you guys? Even in the absence of a listening post, there isn't any cloud cover. So the bomber pilots could, just use their eyes to identify targets for elimination? Other than the alleged bomber tie-in, the listening post doesn't really pose much of a threat to the execution of the final phase, like at all. Sure, the listening post could perhaps provide advanced warning to the Chinese forces of the attack, but the assault wasn't exactly subtle, and it's not like the US analysts are going to be cracking open any encrypted intel in time to aid the assault. As for the assault's climax, the final phase, there are a lot of cool little details that are easy to miss that I really appreciate here. For example, there is the subtle gearing up of the armored cavalry, if you will, with the T-51 units being delivered in tandem shipping crates to actually seeing a fully geared up unit taking target practice in the back of the tent. It's a nice touch. Then, there is also the photo op that takes place before the assault, where the photographer jokingly states, "Who knows? This could be a statue someday," or at least something to that effect. And you guessed it, that is the exact photo immortalized in marble as the Anchorage Memorial in Washington, D.C. So that's all really neat, but the beginning of the assault itself is quite underwhelming. For some reason, on the final assault, you are stripped of your strike team. I really don't understand that. You would think at the climax you would definitely want a strike team, but okay, it's just you and your main man Benji, and you charge down the truly bizarre trench line between you and the Chinese forces. I mean, if you actually think about this trench, like with any level of logic, it directly connects to the enemy side. It's like someone forgot that trenches are, supposed to run roughly parallel to each other because they're opposing forces. They're not supposed to connect the two sides, so that's weird. Also, the trenches are incredibly straight, so apparently in the Fallout universe, no lessons were learned from World War I, as trench lines should be filled with twists and turns such that a direct artillery strike doesn't knock out a whole line of men. I know it's a bit of a nit, but I wanted to point that out. Back on the positive side, however, the T-51 units being deployed mid-mission and then absolutely wrecking the Chinese forces is a nice bit of storytelling that is unfortunately squandered a little when it comes to the finale, which is, well, quite deeply flawed. The pulse minefield I actually think is neat, and it's an excellent counter to the power armor threat. But all that is incredibly pointless when you decide to put a Control-Alt-Delete button on the wrong side of your lines. That's a real facepalm for sure. Then, all you get to do at the end is run across the now freaking empty field, and then talk to General Jinwei amid a freaking firefight. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's stop and have some tea while everyone else kills each other. Right. I mean, I guess it makes sense from the standpoint of this is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic role-playing game, and you can't really play a role if you're not allowed to talk to the guy. But I don't know, it all feels a little contrived. Then, if you do manage to talk him down, good for you. I don't think I've ever done it. I'm not much of a speech player myself. But yeah, if you don't, you have to fight him in a duel, I guess. It certainly ends the whole operation with a whimper. But hey, at least he has a really cool pulse sword, and he apparently knows how to use it. All in all, I'm glad we got Operation Anchorage, as it gives us some much needed insight into the Sino-American conflict. I just wish more logical sense was used, and that the gameplay, actually felt like you were playing a Fallout game. With the health and ammo dispensers lying around all over the place, it really feels like you were playing a bad version of Doom or some other arcade shooter, not really a post-apocalyptic role-playing game. I mean, during the DLC, there is no gear progression to speak of, and really no resource economy, so it's incredibly simple to just pick a weapon and use it throughout the entire campaign, which to me just feels truly bizarre in a Fallout game. Although, I must admit, while I'm up on my high horse here, not having to worry about weapon durability and inventory maintenance was pretty neat. Well, that's all I've got. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. I'm sorry this one got out to you a bit late, but that's probably going to be the norm going on as I got transferred at work and my soul died a little bit along with that transfer. So, I don't have nearly as much time to work on videos as I once had. Truly a tragedy, I know. Anyways, thanks to all of you for stopping by once again, and I hope to see you in the comments either here or in the upcoming Chimera video. Spydingo, out.